Hello friends, welcome back to Daily Movie Recaps. A new movie recapped, every single day. Today, we will recap an Indian Hindi language biographical historical drama film Sardar Udham released in 2021. Spoilers up ahead, so watch out. Enjoy the recap. The movie starts with a flashback in writing, which tells about an incident that happened in India, during the British rule. On 13th of April 1919, the walled city of Amritsar experienced a horrific massacre. Brigadier General Reginald Dyer ordered his men to open fire at a peaceful gathering of over 20,000 people at Jallianwala Bagh, without warning. Thousands of children, women, and men lost their lives in that bloodbath. All this happened because the Lieutenant Governor of Punjab, Michael O'Dwyer, believed that fear instills obedience, and he wanted everyone to obey British rule. Then, we see Udham Singh being released from prison after spending time in there for previous acts. He heads out to a lodge and meets up with a friend named Nand Singh, who he informs of the next steps to be taken in his journey. Nand Singh gives him a fake passport to travel and promises him that he will take him to Lahore. From there, he has to find his way to London. On the way out, he also informs him that he is being followed by the authorities and must be careful how he goes about his business. Udham alters his appearance by shaving completely and then slips away in the dead of the night, escaping the watchful eyes of the police. Later, he visits his cousin, and has some food from there. But he won't stay there for long. Just after eating, he leaves, telling his cousin to stay safe. While he heads up to Lahore, and then Afghanistan, to procure a new passport and a weapon, news of his escape has reached Scotland Yard in London, and a notice is put out for his capture, all over the city back in India. Meanwhile, Udham manages to arrive in England by trekking through Russia, and eventually getting on a ship to the United Kingdom. He then visits a restaurant, and gives the manager a note Nand Singh gave him, back in India. The note says, Kopakar Punjab Restaurant, and the restaurant manager looks at it, and tells him that the person Udham is looking for, is not there, and tells Udham to check at the Sikh temple. There was a person observing him in the restaurant, and when Udham comes out of the restaurant, he follows Udham and takes him to the person Udham was looking for. There he meets with some high-profile Indian contacts, who give him the lay of the land and advise him to keep his head down, and avoid any suspicion. He spends 6 years planning and plotting, before finally making a decision. During that time, he finds out that Brigadier General Reginald Dyer has died, which he confirms after visiting Reginald's grave. Later, he looks for Michael O'Dwyer's address in the telephone directory. But, he finds so many people with the same name. Hence, he follows every one of them, to confirm the person he is looking for. In 1940, he visits a talk, held in Caxton Hall, where the former Lieutenant Governor of Punjab, Michael O'Dwyer, is speaking, and shoots him down, before being apprehended by the police. Once he has been arrested, he gets beaten and questioned incessantly about his true motives, and whether he had any accomplices in this crime. Detective Inspector John Swain is the man in charge of the investigation, and he proceeds to question Udham, to find out more about his plans. The police arrests everyone whom he has met before, and questions each person, to know more about Udham. Along with paper records they find in their archives, it is revealed that Udham moved around quite a bit while in London. He took on all sorts of jobs, and even changed his place of residence frequently. A Russian woman who provided him with lodging mentioned that he was also in contact with a British woman. That woman turned out to be Eileen Palmer, a member of the Communist Party in Britain. Udham reached out to her for some kind of support, or leads, to help him in his efforts to build an Indian resistance in a foreign land. When she is questioned, Eileen claims that she did not know anything about his extremist plots, or plan to assassinate the Lieutenant Governor. She had referred him to members of the Irish Resistance Army, through whom he managed to secure a deal for weapons and safe passage back to India. However, the IRA safe houses are raided before his plans come to fruition, and he flies to Russia. In Russia, he meets some leaders, and asks for help in fighting, by providing some weapons. At that time, Russia was at war, and hence they were not in a position to deliver weapons to Udham. Whilst in police custody, he is constantly beaten and tortured to extract more information, but he always remains silent, and does not reveal anything. Swain asks him about his relationship with Bhagat Singh, and Udham recalls the time he spent with him, and they sowed the seeds of their revolution, before Bhagat Singh was eventually captured and hanged. He also remembers the difference between terrorists and revolutionaries, which Bhagat Singh explained while Udham was with him. Later, Swain pretends to be friendly with him, and asks his real name. Udham shows his hand, in which the name, Ram Muhammad Singh Azad, is tattooed. Swain reports that to his higher officers, and they fear to tell that name to the outside world, because the name is a symbol of Indian religious unity. Udham gets a lot of coverage in the press, which causes some unease among the British aristocracy, as his every act can be construed as political disobedience, which may start a movement. The British government decides to censure the press, in order to control the narrative of the case. They also fear prolonging the trial would make people in London start protesting. So, the Prime Minister orders to speed up the case, and end it before the people of London get on the roads. Meanwhile, the prosecution prepares confessions from some of Udham's associates, to add on to the previously stated charges against him. When the trial approaches, Udham is visited by his defense lawyer, who urges that he cooperates, so that they may present a solid case in front of the judge. Udham begins to tell the lawyer about his arrival, with the decision to terminate Michael O'Dwyer. Udham directly had contact with O'Dwyer when he was still a pen salesman. He managed to build a rapport with him, which helped him later on. He approached him later, in need of a new job, to which O'Dwyer obliged. He becomes a member of his staff, carrying out household chores and driving him around. One night, when O'Dwyer was quite drunk, he rambled on about what happened in Amritsar in 1919. He claims that the shooting was justified, and the mob that gathered there deserved everything that happened to them. This really incensed Udham, and he decided to leave, because he could no longer work for such an evil man. After leaving O'Dwyer, Udham works in a factory, and attacks the manager there, when he tries to be cruel to another Indian worker. He is fired from the job, and his Indian friends in London ask him to leave London for their safety. After some days, Udham notices a poster of a speech, held at Caxton Hall, and sees the name Michael O'Dwyer on it. Udham is tired of waiting for the right moment to pull the trigger, and hence he decides to do it at the Caxton Hall. He hides the gun inside a book, and enters the hall, where he pulls the gun and shoots him. He then asks the lawyer what British law thinks about what he did, whether they make the protest into a termination, or will they make the termination into a protest. After hearing everything, without answering the question Udham asked, the lawyer leaves the jail. At the trial, Udham asks permission to take oath on a classical romance book, Hare Ranja. The court grants permission, since it is allowed to take oath in whichever book the accused prefers. A fair case is barely heard, with Udham ranting about ideology, and attacking the British Imperial Raj, while the prosecution requests speedy judgment, because Udham had already confessed to the crime. He is eventually sentenced to be hanged by the judge. In his jail cell, Udham receives one final visit from Detective Swain, who has a genuine heart-to-heart with him. He asks him what the trigger was that turned him into a Terminator, since he hadn't taken any life before that. Udham tells him everything that happened on April 13, 1919. On that day, people are protesting outside the British Embassy. Police march toward them and beat everyone. Udham, who is among them, hides from the police and escapes. A meeting is held at the governor's office, and O'Dwyer orders his officers to control people from protesting. Understanding that his officers might fail, he calls Brigadier General Reginald Dyer to take charge, and gives him permission to terminate anyone who protests against the British. The next day, Reginald Dyer brings his troops to the Jallianwala Bagh, where people are protesting peacefully. The police won't have any kind of talks with the people, instead, they take the position to shoot and end lives. People are a bit scared, but the leaders of the protesting group ask the crowd not to panic. As the people were settling, the police started firing and terminating many protesters gathered there. One of the protesters, Bali, runs into the orphanage with a bullet wound, and informs Udham about the firing. After sending him to medical help, Udham runs to the site. He sees many people are dead, and some are still alive. Udham decides to help those who are still alive, and with some help, he takes many of those people to the hospital. But still, around 500 to 600 people lost their lives on that day, including children and women. Swain listens to his story, and understands the reason why he terminated O'Dwyer. He then leaves the cell silently, after shaking Udham's hand. Before Udham gets hanged, he is given the chance to meet his friend, Aline. She requests him to ask for a pardon so that he may live. But Udham disagrees with respect, and tells her it's time for him to meet his friend. On 31st of July 1940, Udham Singh is hanged in London prison, for terminating Michael O'Dwyer. Please leave a like, or comment, to let us know, which movie you would like to watch next. And don't forget to subscribe, and turn on your notifications. This way you'll never miss any movie recap again. Thanks for watching, and stay safe.